Okay, we're going to discuss the tenet of the coming of Mashiach. Before we speak about the Mashiach, who's known as Mashiach ben David, the anointed one who's from the Davidic line, which when he comes, ultimately, all evil will be purged from existence. You know, the end of the Chadgaja, which is the last thing we say in Haggadah, we speak about the father who buys a kid, and then the cat eats the goat, and then a dog bites the cat, and so on and so forth. And finally, at the end, we speak about the ritual slaughter slaughters the ox, and then the angel of death takes the ritual slaughterer, which is the reality of life. Man doesn't live forever. The angel of death was created by God, that he's the agent to take a person's life when it's time to leave this world. But the only reason why death was introduced to existence was, if you read the narrative at the beginning of creation, Adam was not meant to be a limited person, to only exist, relatively speaking, for a moment. He was supposed to be eternal. But because he had eaten of the Eitz Hadas, of the tree of knowledge, which the fruit was good and evil, and when he ingested this into himself, since all existence was created on behalf of man, so all the energies that flow to existence are only because the human being has to be accommodated. All that exists to facilitate the objective of man's existence. So if man himself is a tainted being due to what he had ingested, which is this evil, which is the most lethal level of evil, so that means everything that comes into this existence, all the energies are limited because it's facilitating a person who possesses this evil as a result of eating of the tree of knowledge. So every aspect of existence, whether it's the air, whether it's the inanimate, whether it's the animate, the intelligent, the unintelligent, everything exists only for man. So if everything only exists for man, and all the energies which God releases to accommodate man's objective in this deficient, compromised state, not the ultimate original intention, therefore everything in existence is tainted with this evil of the tree of knowledge. At the end of time, God will purge this existence of all evil. There will not be a trace of that evil any longer. Man will naturally only do the will of God. Every human being who exists then will be fully invested in the objective and the purpose and value of existence, which the Navi says in the Chavodi Barosiv, I've created this existence for my glory. To be able to address that objective for God's glory, every human being having the level of clarity on an absolute level, because the only reason why we have a jaundiced eye or we see through a colored lens is only because we're all tainted with that evil of the tree of knowledge. But once the end of time comes, is before the world comes to an end, all that evil will be purged from this existence. Man will naturally have an understanding, not only intellectually, emotionally, to be able to internalize to his essence the value of serving God. And therefore there would not be, there's no longer hindrances or any vagueness in the understanding of what we must accomplish. That's the end of time. We speak about Hashem kol oretz, we say, right before we say Yishtabach, which is the closing blessing of the days, we say, Volu Moshim Lahartzion Nishboris Hareisov. Saviors will come to Mount Zion to judge Mount Hareisov, Edom represents the evil in existence. Edom, the Edomites, the Romans destroyed the second temple. The counterforce to God's presence in this world is Edom. Amalek is the child of Edom. They're the most exaggerated level of evil. They cannot coexist with God. God says, my throne is not complete until they're removed from this existence. They're obliterated from this existence. At the end of time, Har Esav will be judged. Hil Hashem HaMelucha. Because God is the king, unquestioned. At any level, God will be the king over all existence. God and his name will be one, recognized in the most absolute level by all mankind. And this is what we pray on Rosh Hashanah. God should purge all iniquity from existence, all evil. Evil will go up like smoke. Mashiach comes, the coming Messiah. That's what's going to happen. However, before Mashiach ben David, the anointed descendant of David, will come and reveal God's glory to the world and teach the world who God is, and he is God's representative on the terrestrial level, there's going to be a battle. The battle is called the Battle of Armageddon. Milchemes Gog uMagog. In this war, all the nations of the world, being led by Gog uMagog, descendants of Ashur, they will lead a battle against the Jewish people. A very significant part of humanity will unite to destroy the Jewish people and to go into, even cross into the borders of Israel and conquer it and destroy it. And we read in the Haftorah of Sukkot about this battle. And when this will take place, God will come out in his full force, full fury. And any of this enemy who steps on soil of the Holy Land, his flesh will just fall off his body. His eyes will just be melting in their sockets. He will not be able to tolerate the holiness of that location. And this is the end. And who's going to wage that battle? Who's going to be the one to wage the battle against these nations who come against Jewish people? He's known as Mashiach ben Yosef. He's the anointed one, except he's not from the Davidic line. He's Mashiach ben Yosef. He's the anointed one from the pedigree of Yosef. Ephraim and Menashe, we find that the first battle against the Amalekites, who led that battle? That was Yeshua. Joshua, who's the prince of the tribe of Ephraim, who was the successor of Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the closest student of Moshe Rabbeinu, he led that battle against the Amalekites. And who led the second battle against the Amalekites? Who failed? King Saul was the first king, but he was not meant to be the eternal king of the Jewish people. King Saul came from the tribe of Benjamin. Benjamin was the other son of Rachel. And again, as the Talmud tells us, that the progeny of Esav will only fall in the hands of the progeny of Rachel, as we explained. Because Rachel, her children, they dominate physicality. They dominate physical existence. Edom epitomizes and personifies the material. Physical power, the height of civilization in the material sense. The Romans, they controlled the world for 500 years until the empire collapsed. But that's Edom. The descendants of Edom will only fall in the hands of Rachel's children. Mashiach ben Yosef, the Messiah, the anointed one who descends from Yosef, he will wage that battle against Armageddon. Ultimately, he will be killed. He will be the victor, but he will be killed in this battle. And then the Messiah of the Davidic line will present himself, and he will be recognized as God's representative. And that's at that moment, all evil will be purged from this existence. So whenever we speak about Chil Hashem, God's name being desecrated, any human being transgressing, whether it's violating the 7 Noahide laws or violating one of the 365 negative commandments that's only unique to a Jew, or not fulfilling one of the 248 positive commandments, what does that do to? It's due to the evil of the tree of knowledge, the sin of Adam, being the father of all mankind. We all have that genetic defect, or our genetics are damaged and tainted and limited, and therefore we're handicapped. Every human being has that handicap. It's part of the human handicap. And we have at some level, as great as you may be, you could be the greatest tzaddik in the world. Being human, you are, the DNA of every human being is from Adam. That DNA has, at some level, it's tainted with the evil of that tree of knowledge. Some have it more, some have it less. We discussed, there were a number of people who were born circumcised. Yaakov was born circumcised. Yosef was born circumcised. David was born circumcised. There's certain people born circumcised. What is, as we said in the name of the Zohar, what is the foreskin? The foreskin is an expression of the evil of the tree of knowledge. Adam was created without a foreskin. When he ate of the tree of knowledge, which is good and evil, that evil expressed itself with a foreskin. Because what is it? It's a covering. Covering means things are not clear. We find that the world, in Hebrew, the word for world is olam. Olam, we speak olam hazeh, olam haba. This world, the world to come, the present world, the world to come. In Hebrew, the word helem means concealment. Means concealment. The world is a location of concealment. Some things are more obvious, some are less, but in the absolute level of clarity, it doesn't exist in this world. At every level, regardless how great you are, there's a challenge that a person has to overcome a certain degree of lack of clarity. Despite the lack, we have to take initiative to do the right thing because of the spirituality achieving and accomplishing and getting the upper hand. That is the challenge of life. The world is helim. The world is concealment. The greater the tzaddik is, the less concealment he has. A person who's more involved in the material, as we say, the material is primary, spirituality, and the person's life may not exist at all. Or even if it does exist, it exists at a very minimal level or an infinitesimal level, maybe on a rote level, or maybe at no level. Person lives purely as a hedonist, as an intellectual animal, nothing more than that. That's what people live their life. Talmud tells us that Rishoim b'chayim kriyim mesim, that an evil person, even when he's alive, he's considered like he's not alive. Kriyim mesim. I mean, how the man just had his physical, and the doctor says fully functional, he's gonna live 120 years. He's never seen such a specimen of health as this person. But Chazal tell us, the Talmud tells us, Rishon b'chayim kriyim mesim. They're considered dead. Now, what is the essence of a human being? The essence of a human being, to differentiate, discern between a human being and animal, is we have a spiritual component. It's called the soul. The soul of the human being is eternal. Any other species, living species, doesn't have this spiritual component known as soul. A person who lives his life as a hedonist, only immersed in the material, and the aspiration is material, and God does not exist within his life to any degree. that spiritual component, for all intents and purposes, what? Is not functional. Not functional. So therefore, Rishon b'chayim kruyim mesim, he's not addressing his spiritual component. We had mentioned in the Chofetz Chaim that since the soul's eternal, the soul has to have a human being, as much as we nourish the body, healthy, fully nourished, every once in a while it needs reinfusion of that nourishment. If not, the body starts waning and eventually the person dies. It needs a continuous infusion, whether it's protein, carbohydrates, other levels of nutrition. Hydration, other person person needs continuous replenishment of that. If the soul is eternal, the soul itself needs a level of infusion, which is the eternal infusion. The mitzvahs we do, the positive commandments we do, and not via the negative, this provides the spiritual infusion in our souls, that the souls now are actually fully geared up to be functional forever. Because the mitzvahs themselves, the commandments, positive, negative, they produce an energy, which is an eternal energy. And when the soul, all components of the soul are infused and fully advanced with this energy, the person lives forever. The person has the function, is functional forever. Because the person is fueled and infused with an energy, which is eternal energy. That's the Chofetz Chaim. So the person does not, in his lifetime, address his soul. So the soul, for all intents and purposes, is not functional. You have a car, a Rolls-Royce engine. You have no oil in the system, no gasoline. But perfect. What happens? That car goes nowhere. Because without energy, but the car says, but it can go. If you add the necessary fuel and lubrication, it will function. But the soul, not only is it not infused with the positive, by not doing the positive and violating the negative, it actually causes eternal damage to the soul. The soul is taken down, it's destroyed. The person destroys his soul by ingesting non-kosher, not observing dietary laws, by violating Yom Kippur and other things, being involved in relationships which are considered unacceptable. All this is a total breakdown of the spirituality of the person. Therefore, showing the Chayim Kriyim Mesim, the Russia, the person who's classified as an evil person, even when he's fully functional in the physical sense, he's like non-existent. He's dead. Because what is a human being? A human being is not his physicality. A human being, the value of physicality is to facilitate the spirituality of the person. But if he doesn't, for all intents and purposes, it's as if he has no soul. And not only does the soul not advance, the soul deteriorates and regresses, and therefore, Rishon b'chayim kriyim mesim, person, even when he's alive, it's like he's not alive. The tzaddik, even after he passes away, tzaddikim b'misasim kriyim chayim. A tzaddik, even after he passes away, it's like he's alive. How's he alive? His body is no longer functional. Why is it tzaddik even after he passes away? Why is it considered as if he's alive? When the tzaddik lives, what is the value of his life? His soul, his spirituality, his service of God. So when he's alive, the physicality has no value unto itself. Its value is the soul. So when he passes away, we only have the soul. So the function of his life now has advanced to another level of a similar level of function, but it's a more advanced level of function. When he was alive, he functioned as a spiritual being, although he was handicapped and he was limited because of the physicality of the body. But once the soul departs from the body, what he's living no differently, but on a more advanced level of the context which he lived when he was alive. Therefore, tzaddikim, devoutly righteous people, even b'misosam, even when they're no longer alive, they're still considered alive. They're fully functional. As they were functional when they were alive in this context, now they're functional in that context at a more advanced level within the spiritual realm. So what is the challenge? The challenge is We are a composite of physical, spiritual, the soul, body. The body itself represents what? The body itself has needs, has drives, we're inclined. The physicality of the body is we're inclined to what? Not to spirituality. In the words of the Kabbalists or the commentators on the Torah, the physicality of the human being is called nefesh habahamis. We have an animal living component. There's an animal component in every human being. And that drives us. And that's the challenge. You have an untamed horse, untamed. And if you break that horse and you uncontrollable, a bronco, and they break the horse to be controlled, all its value becomes exceptional because that horse has ability, but if it's not controlled, it's destructive. But if you're able to control it and condition it to follow the order of the master is able to do phenomenal things with that horse. The human body is more extreme than the most uncontrolled bronco, uncontrolled animal. That animal has to be tamed, has to be broken, has to be conditioned. The only way you can condition that animal is only by spiritualizing it, giving it spiritual, infusing the soul, which is directly connected to that body. That will actually give the body sensitivities and a sense of what direction those energies should be transmitted. Where do you put, there's an expression, you put your eggs in the right basket, not in the wrong basket. Where do you put those energies? The physicality, the intellect, the vibrancy, the good health. A person prides himself, he could play racquetball for 3 hours and get a perfect score. And he plays off every wall. The Basil Shem writes in Path of the Just, the battle we have from the moment we're born till we die is a forefront battle. It's no different than the racquetball. And you don't have to wear those fancy sneakers and those, designer shorts and shirt and belong to that special club. And they write you up, what kind of racket you used, you and John McEnroe, whatever it is, these kind of that on that level. We're no different. We're in a much more serious challenge. Forefront battle. At every turn, every move, every nuance of our lives, we're being drawn and driven by that animal. As long as we breathe, the animal's part of us. Now it's a struggle. It's a challenge. We're always in that conditioning process. Does the animal overtake the soul, or the soul does sufficient infusion that the animal's abilities are channeled through the spiritual channel and invested to advance that spirituality? That is the challenge of life from the moment we're born until we die. The Rambam writes, based on the Talmud, that a person is able to do tshuva till the last second, the last breath of his life. Ad dikduko shel nefesh. The Rambam writes that a person has an obligation to study Torah until the last moment of his life. Why? So the Rambam writes because since Torah itself is the only antidote, it's the only spiritualization process to spiritualize the physicality and to negate, and the only antidote to the evil inclination. The moment you stop studying, the Rambam writes, one begins forgetting. You begin forgetting, although we don't realize that the process has begun, but factually it is. Therefore, by continuously being engaged, that continuous attachment gives us that ultimate level of clarity. That's the ultimate infusion, that the animal never gets the upper hand, not for a moment. And you always are able to maintain that level of cognizance and clarity that when we depart from this world, we depart as spiritual beings, although we're physical. Because we took the physicality and we converted it, or we directed it, that its value is our spirituality. Because it was created to facilitate as it says in Pirkei Avos, and Kemach Torah. There's no bread, there's no Torah. We're physical beings. We have to eat, we have to sleep. But the question is, why? At what level? To what degree? This is all part of the challenge. King Solomon writes in Mishlei, in Proverbs, Tzaddik ochel l'sov nafsho. A tzaddik, when he eats, he only eats enough to sate his soul, only to be functional, fully functional, to be able to be that special spiritual being. He sleeps sufficiently, he eats sufficiently, takes care of himself sufficiently, that he should fully function as that human being, to be able that his physicality should facilitate his spirituality at the most advanced level. The Rambam writes in the laws of Deos, writes that a human being could live every moment of his life, 24 hours a day, as many years as you have, totally as a mitzvah. When you eat, when you sleep, when you vacation, when you relax, when you cohabit, everything. Mitzvah. How? If a person sleeps, to be able to have sufficient energy, to have clarity, that his body should be healthy, to be able to do the will of God. And you eat and you nourish your body, and you exercise, and you vacation, and you relax, only for God's sake. That's why you're doing it, nothing other. It's not for a self-interest, only for God, that it should be fully functional. And I have children. I cohabit to be able to have children, to fill the mitzvah of procreation, and to raise those children as God wants them to be raised. So if that's the case, although it's all physical, and simultaneously you have physical pleasure, doesn't make a difference. As long as you do it for God's sake, that's a spiritual action. You've taken the physical and you've actually infused within it this spiritual component, which takes the physical and converts it into something spiritual. Because now it's being channeled through the spiritual channel. So Rambam writes, you're able to live every moment of your life in a state of holiness. What's going to be when Mashiach comes? Mashiach ben Yosef. That's the battle. That's the battle between good and evil. Yosef represents the power to control the physicality of the world. As we see Yosef, he was sold into slavery within no time. He actually ran all his master's material, financial affairs. He goes and he's imprisoned. All the years he's in prison, he becomes the warden of the prison. It's become known he has the ability to interpret dreams, and he interprets the dreams of Pharaoh. Who does he become? Becomes the viceroy of Egypt. Not only viceroy, Paro was only a figurehead, but who actually controlled the world and dictated the world and was the sustainer of the world? Yosef. The Medrash tells us the Egyptians came and they complained to Pharaoh, and he said, you put a man into position of viceroy, the man is a madman. It's unheard of. He wants us to, he will only sell us food if we circumcise ourselves. So Paro said, what's the problem? You knew that famine was coming. You were told to store away grain. You people are totally irresponsible. Why didn't you listen to what he had forecasted? So they said, we did. So what happened to all your grain? He said, he decreed it should rot. Yosef decreed it should rot. So Pharaoh says, and if he decrees we should all die, what are you going to do? You better listen to him. That's what Pharaoh told his subjects. You better listen. He decreed it should rot. That's physicality. Yosef dictates physicality. Yosef dictates, do you circumcise, don't you circumcise yourself? That is the ultimate of physicality. The foreskin, that represents the evil. That usually overtakes a person. Yosef dictates that. Yosef is the son of Rochel. They dominate physicality, all challenges of physicality. Yosef in Egypt, despite the environment, was the most extreme level of the antithesis of what holiness was. Yosef is known as Yosef HaTzadik. Although he was a man all by himself for 22 years, Yosef is classified as Yosef HaTzadik. He was able to meet every one of those challenges, not only meet the challenge, he was on top of it. He rose above it all. He will fight that last battle against Armageddon. He will be killed in that battle. And after he's killed, all evil will be purged because he will be the victor. The victory of that battle means all evil now is ready to be removed. Existence, terrestrial, celestial, everything, there's not going to be a trace of that evil any longer in existence. Now man no longer has free choice. Man's actions no longer have any value. All that exists now is being fully invested in doing the will of God. That's going to happen when Mashiach comes. So let's talk. Every moment of God's will being transgressed, every moment of God's name being desecrated is due to what? It's due to the evil in existence. If a person has love for anyone and his beloved is disgraced and castigated and abused and persecuted, what does it cause the one who loves that person? Tremendous pain. Pain which is overwhelming, not to be understood what the level of pain is. If a Jew truly has love for God and he understands that the objective of existence is l'chvodi barosiv, God says, I only created this world for my glory. And the way existence is evolving and manifesting itself, everything is contrary on the most extreme level to that objective, which we call Chil Hashem. Chil Hashem. It means the name of God is being desecrated. Rav Chaim Volozhin writes, the word in Hebrew, the word cholol, means vacuum. It's a vacuum. The way the world behaves and conducts themselves, it's as if God doesn't exist. There's a vacuum. When people behave and desecrate his name and transgress his will and commit sins, God removes his obvious presence from this existence. And therefore his name is even desecrated to a greater degree. I remember many years ago, when Eichmann was caught, Yemach Shmo B'Zichro, Eichmann was responsible. Hungarian Jewry entered into the Holocaust in 1944. In 1 year, Eichmann caused the death of 900,000 Hungarian Jews. In less than a year, they took the manpower off the front to bring about the final solution as quickly as they can. That was the priority of the Nazis. Yemach Shmam Zichron. The final solution. In 1 year, over 900,000 Jews, men, women, and children were killed, were murdered. It's not to be believed. He was like a machine, a machine of what? Of annihilation. So when they caught him, and the whole story, how the Mossad, he was caught and captured in Argentina, and the way he was transferred to Israel, so on and so forth. It was in the front page news throughout the world. So there was many newsreels then. If you would go then to the movies, when to go to the movies cost 35 cents. The Loews Delancey, the Loews Canal, for 35 cents, you were able to get into the movie theater. And I remember I was just bar mitzvah then. We went, and they had newsreels. The Nazis, Yemach Shmam V'Zichron, their name should be obliterated forever. Everything was recorded, everything. And they took pictures. They took newsreels of everything. The camps, the executions, the way they numbered the people, every town, every village, how many Jews were there, how many Jews were taken out. There was nothing that was not recorded. They were so exacting when it came to the killing machine, it was not to be believed. And so there was the headline, the front picture on the Time magazine was, God is dead. If a Holocaust could take place, God forbid, God is dead. That was the front in bold letters, G, not dash D, it had the O there, is dead. You know what that means? It's God's world. The Holocaust happened because God allowed it to happen, gave them the wherewithal to do it because it's man's choice. We have a question, why? We don't have all the answers. But if you believe in God, nothing happens unless God wills it should happen. Why? We have no idea. So that the world, that the headline was, the front cover of Time magazine, God is dead. What is that? That's a level of Chil Hashem. God's name is desecrated at the most extreme level. But we don't need that. What about a person says, the power and my own ingenuity brought about all the success, all my power. I am a self-made man. I'm a maker of my own destiny. What is that? It's Chil Hashem. God is putting the money into your account. He even gives you the ability to write the check and sign your name and provides the banker, personal banker. And you say, you know something? All these people are my beck and call. You know, I'm God's gift to humanity. When I walk, everybody stands. Everybody reveres me. Everybody prostrates themselves. You know something? What is this? This is the ultimate level of disgrace and arrogance. God is funding the operation, and you would take credit for everything. But what does that do to? Person is blind, expecting to see light. Person has a cataract. He sees some light filtering through, but he's far from clarity. And even if they take off and they put in the artificial lens in the eye, even after that, is it 20/20 or even better than that? It's not. There's still slight degrees of what? Of lack of clarity. A human being is perfect as he may be. There's no such thing as the absolute perfect person. Being descendants of Adam, who had allowed that evil to be intertwined, enmeshed, embedded in the DNA of every human being, every one of us has that handicap, that is a degree of lack of clarity, which causes us at some level to be distracted and inclined to something which is not the ultimate absolute spirituality. I'll give you an example. The Chofetz Chaim, do you think for a moment his challenge was to observe Shabbos, not to eat kosher, or not to have a forbidden sexual relationship? You think that was the Chofetz Chaim's challenge? It wasn't his challenge. But what about learning every moment that's available to be fully invested in Torah and mitzvahs? Do you know the Chofetz Chaim kept a little notebook, and he would record the moments he felt which weren't utilized properly. Before Rosh Hashanah, he would take out this notebook, and he recorded that he had 45 minutes during the year that he felt were not invested properly in Torah study or utilized to do the will of God. You know, 45 minutes in a year. That means the amount of time he slept. If he felt he slept 1 minute too late, if he felt he should have been doing something with that moment other than what he'd used it for, and he failed at that moment, he recorded it. You know how many moments there were in the year? 45 minutes a year to do tshuva. And as I always say, the Chofetz Chaim's non-utilizing properly should be our time the way we utilize our minutes. This was the Chofetz Chaim. So what was the Chofetz Chaim's challenge? When you do the mitzvah, you do it lishma. You have to do it for the sake of God. And even when you do it for the sake of God, the many levels, is it out of reverence? And is it out of fear of punishment? Is it selfless? There's so many categories and levels. And if you should be at that next level, not at that level, it's considered a shortcoming. You didn't fully advance to the level you could have advanced. But who knows that? Only God knows that. We don't know that. All we can do is try to do our best. And we deal with where we're at. And a person's judged. Only God judges a person. We don't judge anyone. So everybody has his challenge. But the reason why even the greatest tzaddik, when he doesn't meet his ultimate potential, why? It's because he has that innate handicap which is called being a descendant of Adam. Being a descendant of Adam means there is some degree of what lack of clarity, and due to that, you're not fully invested and advanced at the level you should be. When Mashiach comes with God's help, as we discuss what exactly this tenet of belief is, all evil that today, they're able to do with genetic engineering, that even if there's a certain defective gene, they're able to address it and correct it. That's what they're working on. So even if there's epilepsy in the family or whatever it may be, which it's part of the genetic profile of that family, they're able to do something, or in utero, there's certain things in the fetus, they're able to do certain things that when the child is born, that the child should be born a healthy child, if you address it soon enough. When Mashiach comes, whatever causes that genetic malfunction or puts a degree of retardation on that spiritual gene, it's going to be removed. It's going to glow, radiate, be fully functional. And when it's fully functional, you're going to have to reserve a seat in the Beis Medrash, in the study hall, in the shul, and tickets are what? You're not going to even be able to pay for a ticket. That's how overcrowded. The builders are going to be busy building study halls and study Torah at synagogues. And it'll be a privilege to be there. And as early as you're there, you're not going to be early enough because somebody's going to be there before you. That's going to be the drive to do the will of God naturally, but you get no credit for it. As when we breathe, we get no credit for breathing. And when our pulses, we get no credit because it's natural. This is all natural. The only reason why we have any level of worthiness and deservingness is only because it's due to our initiative. Because we're inclined to do differently. We're not inclined to spirituality. Therefore, any decision we make, we're always at a level of crossroads. It's due to the way we shift that rudder. Do we go to the right? Do we go to the left? Do we take that power and infuse it and channel it into spirituality? Or do we channel it into the animal and empower the animal? As I said, because a person is a composite of the spiritual and the physical, and we have an animal soul, an animal life source, which drives us, which has an uncontrollable level of power. But yet we have the means to temper it and channel and spiritualize it, to be able to utilize it fully invested in the spiritual realm, which is called Torah and mitzvahs. That's the antidote. Ner mitzvah Torah ora. King Solomon says, Ner mitzvah, the material for the illumination is the oil, the receptacle, the wick. But when you light it, now you have the illumination. Now you have clarity. And we say seeing is believing. Ezel chocham harosa nomad. A chocham sees the ramifications of one's actions. Seeing is not abstract intellectualism. Seeing is reality. At the end of time, when evil will be purged from existence, we will see it, internalize it, and we'll breathe it and live it. That's when you inhale fragrance. You feel sometimes, especially if you feel like euphoria, it'll go beyond that. It's something we can't even relate to or imagine what that is. He used to tell the story. There was this young man, and when he was a little young boy, he lived not too far from Mount Everest. But the mountain was a very El Capitan, one of those mountains that had to be, and it was his dream to climb the mountain. So he went to his father. He's about 12, 13. He says, Father, I'd like to begin climbing the mountain. He says, look, until you become an adult, you're at home. Once you become an adult, you could address your dream, your aspiration. And start thinking about how you're going to climb the mountain. So the child, he's preoccupied. At the age of 18, he's out the door. And he has all the climbing gear, the rappelling, all the provisions to be able to make this ascent. He figured it would take him, he's 18, 20, take him 20 years. And he begins climbing the mountain. It's already 20 years have passed. He only scaled a third of the mountain. He's 40 years old. So at the age of 40, he invested 20 years of his life. Doesn't make sense. He should descend, go back to the bottom. Doesn't make sense. He's going for the summit. What happens? Another 20 years pass. He has a third of the mountain. Definitely at this point, he's disappointed. Doesn't make sense to go back. He's going all the way to the top. He reaches the summit. He's already walking with a cane. He's bent over. And finally, he gets to the top of the mountain. He's 80 years old. He looks out. He can see the whole world. And what does he do? All of a sudden, he meets somebody on top of the mountain, a 13-year-old boy. And he says to this young boy, he says, my whole life I've been climbing this mountain. I started at the age of 18, 20. I'm 80 years old and I finally arrived. You're 13 years old. How did you get here? He says, I was born on top of the mountain. That's why I'm here. The Jewish people have something over the rest of the world. We have certain antecedents. We have a certain spiritual profile which the world does not have. We have certain things innate in our genome, in our genetic makeup, which the world does not have, because we descend from the holy patriarchs. As I always mention, the Talmud says that Jews are rachmanim, Jews are compassionate, merciful. That's innate in every Jew. How he expresses it, that's a different discussion. You know, is it you join the Peace Corps and you're in rice paddies up to your waist? Is that way you express it? Or do you express that mercy and that compassion differently? By Shanim, Jews have conscience. There's no nation in the world that has conscience the way the Jewish people have conscience. Shame. Doing acts of loving kindness. There's no nation in the world that does chesed the way the Jewish people, regardless of your beliefs. There's something innate in every Jew that we're attracted to help someone, although we have no invested interest in that. We do it. We're naturally compassionate. We're naturally merciful. We have conscience. There's an interesting, Moshe, the last 30 days of his life, 36 days of his life, he gives Musar. He admonishes the Jewish people because he knows in 36 days he's passing away. And he recounts what happened over the last 40 years, from the time he left Egypt until the moment before he last 36 days. And he spoke about setting up a judicial system. Who is qualified to be a judge, to sit on this panel, to adjudicate the various issues? So one of the qualifications to be a judge, you have to be chachamim. You have to have knowledge, have wisdom. Otherwise, you're not qualified to be a judge. So Rashi over there cites the Aramaic translation. What are chachamim? Those who have shame. If you have shame, that tempers your wisdom. A person who has no shame, you could have a genius and you could be Machiavellian that you can't understand. No compunction, and you'll invest that genius to bring about a level of evil not to be imagined. But if you have shame, you have conscience, the conscience tempers that genius, that you channel it only within areas which are constructive, rehabilitative, contributing, not to be destructive. So the component of Baishanim, which is an innate characteristic of Jewish people, the Jews themselves innately have a sense of seeing things more correctly because the conscience of a Jew doesn't exist by any other nations. That's the reason. Why? It's not fair. Everything is based on your genetics. The genetics the Jews have, it wasn't endowed by God. The patriarchs started off, they made choices in their lives. Avram made choices. He even was willing to die for the choice he made, that he chose to believe in a monotheistic being. He went into a kiln. He was a pariah. He was hounded. He was a fugitive. Until finally, he became the victor against the four mightiest nations in the world. And he was declared and proclaimed to be Prince of God. Then there was Yitzchak, and then there was Yaakov. These people took many initiatives to be able to achieve and purge themselves of all the inclinations which are natural to the human being, despite the evil which Adam had actually intervened and embedded into the genetic profile of a human being. We are beneficiaries of that because we are their descendants. The rest of the world descend from something other than that. But even a non-Jew has a choice. He has no obligation. But a non-Jew, if he chooses to convert to be a Jew, it has to be due to his own initiative. He's not forced. There's no such thing as forced conversions to be a Jewish person. But it's through his own choice that he wants to become part of the Jewish people. He can. There is a process. So everybody has choice to be able to assume, because once you become part of that system, certain things come to you. But it's not so simple. It's not the same as being original or being associated. No, there's a famous story with the Rambam was known as the greatest physician of his time. And he was the personal physician of the Egyptian Sultan. And many of the other doctors, they were very envious to the point that whatever they could do to sabotage the Rambam's remedies and his approaches in medicine, they tried to actually disgrace him within the field of medicine. And they came to the Rambam, and they came to the Sultan, and they said, we have a disagreement with Rambam, with Maimonides. He says that if you take an animal and you condition and tame it, the conditioning process is purely superficial. You cannot change the essence of that animal. They said, we disagree. We feel you could. That through extensive conditioning, the internal aspect of the animal could be changed due to the conditioning. So the Sultan says, not a problem. Whoever is proven to be correct, he will be my physician. The rest of the others will be dismissed. So if the Rambam loses this challenge, he will be dismissed and sent to exile. Okay? What was the discussion? They took a bobcat and they're going to condition the bobcat that he could walk on his two hind legs and teach him all the graces, social graces and amenities of a first-class maitre d' to serve at the Sultan's banquet. So the Rambam says, so the Gentile physicians who disagree said, it'll take us a year. Rambam says you could condition that bobcat for 20 years. The bobcat will always be a bobcat. He said, we disagree. Okay. Finally, the showdown came, high noon. And this is going back a while back. And you have this opulent hall, banquet hall. Everything is set. All the people are there waiting at the tables to be served. This bobcat comes in with a tuxedo or whatever the garb was then. And he's carrying a tray with the finest wines and crystal glasses and other foods. And he's walking on his hind legs with all the graces of the most graceful maitre d', as if he went to school, culinary school, not only to be the chef, but be to the maitre d' school. And the Rambam was planned this. And the Gentile doctors are glowing. Finally, they're going to be able to put the last nail in Maimonides' coffin. The end of his career. The Rambam came to this banquet and he had a mouse in his pocket. And as this bobcat, and as he gets close to the Sultan, is about to serve him, he takes that mouse, throws it on the floor, The bobcat, in a second, became the bobcat again. Drops the tray on the sultan with the glasses and the wine. The Rambam was the victor. He won this. He proved you cannot change the animal. The essence of the animal is an animal. Conditioning purely superficial. A Jew, it's not the case. The essence of the Jew is the soul. Why? Why is that the dominant component of the Jew? Because the patriarchs, due to their investment and what they did, and they attached themselves and disseminated and proclaimed God's glory, they were able to achieve a genetic profile within themselves that no other nation has. What the problem with us is, with the Jew, we are physical beings, and the question is, which has the upper hand? The physicality? Do we succumb to the physical inclinations of the body, or the internal essence, which is the soul? And that's the challenge. So the Jew, through conditioning, were able to magnify the internal aspect of the Jew. The non-Jew doesn't have that. So you can have all the conditioning in the world. All the inclinations of that person will remain that. At best, they'll be tempered. But if the setting is not right, it rears its head. The Jew, if you condition it and temper it with Torah, with mitzvahs, which God says, I created that evil inclination, but I created the Torah as its antidote. Specifically, it addresses it. As you have the antibiotic, which addresses the bacteria and destroys the bacteria, identically, lahavdil, God says, I've created the Torah to be the antidote for that evil inclination. And when it's put at bay or removed, then the soul glows and becomes magnified. So therefore, Rambam writes, through conditioning, a Jew could become a different type of person. Even though we're born with certain characteristics, we're able to actually overcome them, because that is not the essence of the Jew, that negative characteristic. But the end of time, but all this that we have to condition, we have to contend with, and all these challenges, it's only due to what? Due to the evil, which Adam allowed to be embedded in our spirituality, in our DNA, which causes all this inclination to go not in the right direction. When Mashiach will come, which we discussed next class, all this will be purged, and man will only be the soul. Being only the soul, it's going to be driven by the spirituality, and therefore all mankind will be fully invested in only God's glory.